Okay, buonasera a tutti, good evening everyone, or good afternoon, what's the time? Maybe good afternoon. And welcome to this debate on the Global Gateway, and our guest today will be Mrs. Abla Abdel-Latif from the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, Mr. Clyde Caruana, the Minister of Finance from Malta, and Ambassador, you all know Ambassador Giampiero Massolo, now chair of Mundis, and we'll try to talk for the next 45 minutes about this initiative that is centered, the Global Gateway of the European Union, which is an important item of the Union's foreign policy to facilitate investments and partnerships, and it's entering its fourth year actually, because it was introduced by Commission President von der Leyen. It was, I think, December 1st, 2021, and well, it was a different world. 3 years ago, the world was different, the Mediterranean was different, and so, well, the idea was to facilitate investments, facilitate networks, communications networks, and basically to provide an instrument for European policy facing the growing energy of Chinese economic investments and influence in the regions bordering Europe. So I would like to start from our guest, Minister Caruana, Minister Clyde Caruana, from Minister of Finance from Malta. And I would like to start just from this first idea. When it was launched, the Global Gateway Initiative was, imagined in a different world. We now have a world that's marked by two wars, one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East, and the idea was that globalization, trade, networked initiatives, and the improvement of global communications would foster a world and a Mediterranean basin without war and in peace. It doesn't seem to be the case. What do you think has happened, and what can happen now? Is this kind of initiatives useful to to overcome this this sense of growing conflict we're seeing in the Mediterranean today?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invite, for being part of this discussion today. I'd like to refer to what you said by first referring to a quote, and I'm referring to Henry Kissinger. And he used to say, if you want to call Europe, if you want to call someone in Europe, whom you would call? And that, of course, remark was for the simple fact that we all speak of Europe, but at the same time, there is sort of a missing sense of leadership in Europe. And with reference to the Global Gateway, especially its essence and importance in today's world, where we have on one side, we all know what's happening on the eastern front of Europe. We all know who are the countries that are giving a helping hand for that conflict in order to perpetuate. And we all know what's happening also on the other side of the Atlantic. So perhaps in the coming months and years, we're going to experience a world that is going to become dominated by major forces. And from where I sit, I continue to see a Europe that is continuing to be missing, perhaps, in all this. Definitely Europe needs to step up its actions and its visibility across the globe. And at times, there's no better way in doing diplomacy through projects. The projects that can be financed through the initiative that you've just mentioned, the Global Gateway. Of course, it is up to Europe now to make sure that the funds that are available, the 300 billion or so, they come to fruition and they increase awareness and visibility of Europe across the globe. The initiatives that the Commission here has earmarked, of course, are initiatives that deal with the green transition, with infrastructure, with digitalization, key projects that, of course, are necessary for countries to develop, to make sure that they have the necessary infrastructure. But the meaning of such funds now, perhaps it has a total new, different meaning from what perhaps it used to have way back in 2021. And the meaning is that of a Europe that has to become more visible, a Europe that has to become more meaningful in the global community. And that, I think that aim has to be achieved even through diplomacy via such initiatives.
More visible, you say?
Yes, because, I mean, if you had to do a particular survey, in whichever country you'd like to, perhaps people first would identify themselves with their country of origin, rather than by saying they are European at first. And I think that this sense of Europeanism, let's call it that way, it has to become more visible in the years to come if we want Europe, that is, its member states, to become more visible on the international stage. I mean, even if we had to look, and I'm going to deviate a bit, on what's going to happen on the eastern side of Europe, that is the Ukrainian conflict. Everyone is waiting to see what the United States is going to do. So it seems that the players who are looking at what's happening at this stage, they are already ignoring what Europe has to say about what's going over there. And everyone is looking on the western side of the Atlantic to see what the United States have to say. And that, of course, in itself, it's a powerful message because, of course, it ignores what the European Union has to say about a conflict that is happening on its doorstep.
Thanks, Minister. I would like to ask Ms. Abdelatif, who is the director of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. Talking about Global Gateway, it definitely was intended as a counterbalance to Chinese influence in regions like Africa, Northern Africa. I remember Ursula von der Leyen saying it's not used to build a road between a Chinese mine and a Chinese port. We would just build a road. It doesn't make sense. So we want to, provide investments and be present with connection, with communications, with environmental initiatives. So the idea was to be a counterbalance. Egypt is a country that is in the Belt and Road Initiative, is associated to China in this worldwide economic initiative, is also now a part of the BRICS countries. So how can be Europe, an initiative like Global Gateway and more in general Europe, relevant to this? Or how can this instrument be relevant to a relationship between Europe and a country like Egypt, if the idea is to have an equal partnership and be a partner as much as China or other countries are?
Okay. Thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for having the MED meeting during this time, which was not easy, and thank the organizers for inviting me. Your question actually is quite complex, okay? And I see it as consisting of 3 parts. Okay. The first one being from an Egyptian perspective, whether really Global Gateway can sort of replace, okay, the BRI. How similar, how different are they? If Egypt's involvement in BRICS would make it lean towards one side more than the other, this is what you're saying practically. And the third one is how this instrument can be used better, can be used more properly in order to encourage the partnership. And let me say a few words about each one of these. On the first one, from an Egyptian perspective, okay, and at least this is my personal opinion, we don't see at all that these two are, replaceable. They are actually quite different, so they can be complementary. It's not that one is going to come and replace the other. Yes, the objectives are similar. The focus is similar in the sense of focusing on the infrastructure, on the digital transformation, okay, on the interest in development, but they are actually quite different. The BRI is a much older initiative, okay? The Global The Global Gateway was only 3 years ago. One is multidimensional and multinational, actually, in nature, because it's coming from a number of countries within Europe and a number of institutions, while the other one is coming from only one country. It is one country, even though it's huge, almost as big as Europe and with a bigger population, but it is one country, and it has state-owned ownership. So it is actually quite a different model. The Global Gateway comes with the standards and values of transparency, et cetera, all the Western standards. The Chinese are not as transparent. They are just after the project for their interests, and they do not interfere with the culture of people, which is one of the reasons why they are infiltrating in Africa way more than Europe. So they are not the same, and so we should not see one as replacing the other one. That's my first point. What is more important is that in reality, on the ground, both of them are more rhetoric than reality. And here I would like to emphasize what Mr. Minister just said about the visibility. Laymen in Egypt, don't talk about Global Gateway. They don't know Global Gateway. They know that there is a partnership agreement between Egypt and the EU that has been operating for a couple of decades. 50% at least of our trade is with Europe. Our investment also is with Europe. And so they don't know anything about this other one. The intentions of the areas of focus, interest in investment are talked about, but on the ground there is still very little. The only thing that happened is a conference that took place in June 2024 to talk about the partnership, and the term Global Gateway was not even used. It's Egypt-EU partnership. That's the only term that is used. Lots of MOUs were signed, and money was assigned from the EU to Egypt in order to support in the macroeconomic situation, but there is nothing really that is physical there. The same goes, by the way, with the Chinese. There are investments in Egypt from China, but there are investments that would have taken place anyway. Investment in the Suez Canal economic zone, some investments, support for the railway roads, but it's not like, for instance, the China-Pakistan road connection, which is a clear part at the heart of the BRI. So this is actually important. It's more rhetoric than on the ground, and the visibility is missing. This is on the first question. On the second question, Egypt's membership in BRICS, in my opinion, is a political membership. This is not an economic collaboration. Those countries are not going to get together and become one unit. It's a political association between a number of countries that are actually suffering from not having been heard because of the Bretton Woods Agreement and the imbalance in power. The Global South is not heard. So this is an attempt of getting together. It doesn't interfere with any of this. On the third question, and very briefly, what needs to be done? For starters, what the Global Gateway, as it enters or as it deals with the country, it has to respect its development priorities. They cannot come with their own agenda. And this is critical for Egypt and even more critical for Africa, because Africa is still looked at as a number of colonies for the European countries. And as they enter, they think they know what is best for them more than them, which is not right and doesn't fly. So that's one point. Second point, the carbon, what is it called? The carbon CBAM. Yes, the CBAM is going to be applied, and is going to affect the exports from Egypt big time. We are paying for climate damage for which we are not responsible. It's a non-tariff barrier that's affecting our exports big time. And so we need, if Global Gateway is to help, we need an initiative similar to the industrial modernization problem that you guys did a number of years ago to green the economy. Third and last point, nothing is going to happen of benefit for Egypt unless the region goes back to security and peace. And I'm not talking about the end of the war. I'm talking about the sustainable peace, which is based on the rights of the Palestinians in the land. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I would like to go over to Ambassador Massolo to ask him, well, first of all, we've just been told that this initiative may be good, but it's not visible, nobody knows about it. And actually, it's very young, only 3 years, but everybody's talking about the Belt and Road. And nobody's talking about this global gateway, not even in Europe, nobody knows about it. And so what is the point? Is there a lack of investment? Is it an effective instrument? Is there a lack of investments? Is it not well politically publicized? Or does it suffer from a very European Union-oriented attitude of like being green, being focused on connectivity, on soft investments, rather than heavy industrial mining, you know, the kind of investment? So what are its shortcomings, or does it have shortcomings, or is it working and we don't know about it?
Well, thank you very much. I think that actually sometimes, especially in Europe, when we speak about infrastructures and in general about initiatives such as Global Gateway, we lose a little bit of sight that this, in the normal world, which means outside of Europe, this kind of initiatives tend to be considered more as a tool of influence rather than a tool of help. Of course, helping and influencing sometimes, more often than seldom, come together, but the philosophy that is behind is different. In Europe, it is always difficult to organize something, to make, as the minister was saying, a meaningful tool with a meaningful governance, recognizable governance, and being active and effective with something that at the end of the day needs the consent of several centers of power, be it the Commission, be it member states, governments, etc. So it looks a little bit out of focus, if you want. And then the aim, that is usually we have an amount of money, and this amount of money is not huge, especially if you compare it with the Chinese, for instance, and even with the G7, the global infrastructure program of the G7, which is more or less a double already there. And you have difficulties in identifying whom to phone, no? And then the mentality. The mentality is that the others, namely the Chinese, are very clear in what they think something like their initiative can achieve. Linking countries to them, trying to share something like common objectives, and influencing their policy making by using what Paracana describes as the functional geography. Infrastructures and invisible links influence and link countries one to the other more than visible and, how can I say, very, very, very spoke about initiatives. It should be much more invisible, much more effective, because the aim is to use it as an instrument of influence. Of course, Europe is not China, and Europe can't, how can I say, it's not supposed to conduct this kind of initiatives. But then, don't be surprised if the initiative is not known, if the Chinese are there and we are not, if you have a G7 initiative that is poorly coordinated with the European one. This all comes unsurprisingly, simply because the conception, the mentality that lies behind is something different. And then there are three other points that are important. One point is that if you start from the point of view, from the starting point, that global gateway should be supposed to give more leverage for Europe in a part of the world in which it is not wise for Europe to give too much weight to the Chinese, then you can do as if the Americans did not exist. In a way or in another, you have to make a link with the Americans. And to do this, you should coordinate better in the G7 what you do as G7 and what you do as global gateway, because at least 4 European countries are in the G7 and are in the global gateway. Second thing, it's a question of resources, and resources are scarce. It's like going to hunting a rhino with a rifle that is not up to the task. Now, let's be frank about it, are scarce. And third thing is that sooner or later, and don't misunderstand me, but Europe will be obliged to reconsider what it means by conditionality. Once again, you can't live, as Mr. Macron said, you can't live with people that usually eat meat if you are a vegetarian. Those who, to a certain extent, you have to do something about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I would like to go over to Minister Caruana. Two things. One is, well, energy and telecommunications and energy transition are crucial, and there are investments from Malta in this area. For example, the Malta-Sicily cable link is one, and probably there are more. And so, do you have programs to, work on that field more? But another thing I wanted to ask you as a European politician. Do you think that the shortcoming of Europe in this kind of initiatives is that Europe is trying too much to protect its own economy more than to go see what happens when you go somewhere else?
Let me start first with the second question. What is Europe trying to do with this money? Well, I think the aims perhaps may be a bit sporadic in the sense that, as the ambassador was saying, the firepower of such fund relative to other initiatives is not that great. And at the same time, I think that one of the biggest problems, shortcomings, if you prefer, that Europe faces is that when it comes to foreign policy, it's more about the individual member states who have the muscle power to present their own interests rather than the European Commission itself. So, of course, when it comes to projects, ideas in different countries across the globe, it's more the foreign voice of a particular member state, whichever it is, that perhaps is visible rather than that of the Commission as a whole. So when it comes to such projects, I think that first and foremost, the Commission tries to do something in order to appease the agenda of different member states. Perhaps at most I tend to link such initiatives in Africa in order to try as much as possible to stem the tide of migration, which is quite a thorny issue with several EU member states. And of course, the Commission tries to do something in order to spur investment in the home country of origin of such people. Whether it's enough or not, that is another issue. What is the ultimate aim of such investment? Well, Europeans especially will have this orthodox vision of going green at all costs, where I sit every month around the table with my colleagues, the finance ministers. At least part of the agenda is always taken up with the green transition. And if I had to look at, mind you, it's not something bad, so don't take me wrong, but the cost that member states especially have to face in the coming years is something quite significant. And I don't see that there's all this commitment from other big countries across the globe. I thought that the Ukrainian crisis, was going to slow down this commitment in terms of pace of how much we managed to get to the point where we want to get, given the increasing cost, but that did not happen. And as a result of that, actually what I'm saying is that certain member states are even doubling down on the commitment to get there as fast as possible. Now, whether that is wise or not, I'd leave it up to everyone to decide on. But nevertheless, all this is having its costs on the populations of such countries, and then therefore it's no coincidence that in certain member states people are voting in certain patterns, and then it comes as a surprise by some why people are expressing themselves in that way. Coming back to Malta, we're the smallest member state, and we will always remain so, even if there's future enlargement. Of course, given that we're a small island state, we have our dependency on certain major issues, such as, for example, when it comes to future supply of electricity, we depend on, as you said, neighboring country, Italy, whereby we have an interconnector. We're planning to have the second one, thanks to EU money and the European Investment Bank. But definitely, in the years to come, we will need to have several more, for the simple reason that the energy demand will continue to increase. There are the commitments that we have to honor when it comes to the green transition, quite onerous, I would say. Whether we'll make it or not, that is another discussion, for the simple reason that the commitments that we have to achieve by 2030 are that we have to have our emission levels, which should be minus 19 of what they were in 2010. We're still quite long away from that. So I think that definitely, most probably, we will miss the targets, as so will other member states. But nevertheless, the investment in the green transition, especially when it comes to the electrification grid, that is something that must continue to move forward. And in this new era, let's put it this way, whereby Europe is trying to be at least more independent from the East when it comes to gas consumption, the importance and the relevance of renewable energy becomes more significant. And especially, it is so much for the simple reason that if we want to avoid, and I conclude on this, future external shocks when it comes to pricing, it is very much important that Europe focuses more on renewable energy, if not for the green transition, at least in order to avoid as much as possible inflationary pressures which come from external shocks in the future.
Well, thanks, Minister. Let me just stay on the subject of energy with Ms. Latif. Well, talking about energy, Egypt has great gas reserves, though it's facing an energy crisis of its own. But first of all, I would like to understand whether this global gateway we're talking about is actually an instrument that can be helpful to coordinate investments with single member states investments, private investments, to create connections between Egypt as a gas producer and Europe. But most of that, apart from that, I would like to ask you, because the Minister mentioned the carbon emission reduction as a problem for Malta and for Europe. You mentioned before the same thing, basically for Egypt. Do you feel that there's the issue of gas, I would like to ask you about, but more than that, do you feel that the philosophy of intervention, economic intervention of the European Union is, is creating gaps between Europe and what countries like Egypt are expecting and would like to hear?
Okay, let me start with the second question, because it's
I will change the order of my questions next time, because you
that's
you
always
always
fine.
start from the second.
No, that's
Okay.
fine. That's fine. No, I'll start with the second, because it's actually very interesting. Because when you asked Mr. Minister, I was going to say I want to comment on this.
Okay, so please.
All right, so I'm glad you're asking me so that I can comment on it. I think what Europe is doing is actually mainly to protect itself. Okay, because your question was very clear.
Wait a minute, you can answer the second question, but not his second.
No, his second, no.
Okay,
Well, it's the same, they're the same.
Kidding.
Okay, yes, I know. No, seriously, the EU its approach to global gateway is to protect itself from China. I personally believe, as an economist, that the EU should not be protecting itself from China. It's the US that's trying to protect itself from the Chinese power. The EU somehow is getting caught in this. You have a very strong economy. If you get united, you have a huge market, and you can survive with the Chinese, no problem. It's the US that's worried. There are no gaps, okay, that need to be filled from from that angle. Let me go to the energy part. You said that Egypt has an energy crisis, okay? Let me put this in the past tense. Egypt had an actually energy crisis in the last few years. Very true. But to understand this crisis and understand the impact of this on Egypt's position as a supplier of energy to Europe, we have to put it in the right context. And the right context is the following. A few years ago, and until actually quite recently, Egypt had serious economic problems. We had a huge accumulation of debt, as you all know. We had macroeconomic instability. Our credit rating went down. You know the whole series of problems, and this had its implication on the energy sector because of the pressure of the debt. Energy was directed to exports more than being satisfying the need of consumption at home, because our electric generators use natural energy. This was the case, but then things have eased up big time from the beginning of this year because of the agreement with the IMF and the new investments that we got. And this means right away less pressure on the energy sector. In addition to two other things, very, very important, we are very serious on our investments in green energy, in like solar energy, wind energy, etc. And we are very strong with these. And we are starting to actually use this type of energy to feed the national grid, okay, and replace the natural gas. And this means over time, much better situation, in addition to the green hydrogen investments that are actually taking place in the Suez Canal economic zone. So this is a key point. This is the context and what's happening. Second thing, we cannot remove the positioning of Egypt as a strong supplier or strong partner with the EU at the energy level because of the temporary situation. Temporary situation is actually being dealt with in a very strange way in the world today, okay? And this includes even the Suez Canal and the Houthis and all this. Okay, let's find other corridors, let's find other ways around, because it doesn't work this way. It's a huge channel. You cannot simply throw investments in something else because of a temporary problem that will end sooner or later. All right. So the same goes with the energy. It's a temporary thing. This does not mean that the global gateway cannot help with this. We do need help. We do have internal constraints. We do have limited infrastructure capacity also for the liquefied natural gas. We could use investments there. Okay, and externally also there are issues. There are fear of investment in the entire region. And that goes back to the stability issue in the region. So where Egypt, all of us, everybody is hoping for a united position to restore the peace in this area in a sustainable and fair manner, so that we can all live happily ever after. And the earth is not going to swallow China and Russia and the world like Cinderella world. It's not going to happen. So we have to find our way around it.
Let me just follow up before I go over to our guests again. Let me just ask, do you feel, does Egypt feel that its relationship with Europe, the European Union, has a more political than economic problem? Meaning that, well, if you look at it, Egypt is a great and growing population and a young population, manpower, is an energy producer and provider. But still, the amount of investment, European investment coming into Egypt, do you think it's proportional to the possibilities that
no,
there
it's
are?
not, it's not
and why?
No, it is not proportional, because that's actually the difference between the Europeans and the Chinese. The Europeans are very, very cautious, very, very careful. Before they enter, they want to make sure that everything is perfect, okay? Sometimes when they talk to other investors in Egypt, they tell them about, say, for instance, bureaucratic problems. Okay? But they forget to ask those people that why they never leave the country if there is so much bureaucracy in it. It's because their profit rate is extremely high. Okay? So it has to do with the investment culture, okay, coming from Europe. There are lots of migrating, but there are migrating investments that are actually approaching Egypt. The Chinese are a lot more, direct. They sort of don't care, so they just get in. So we need you to be tougher. So it's an economic thing, but we've never had political problems, political agenda, political issues with the EU. No, at all. Okay, even actually in the present situation, migration is always a concern, but not for Egypt, it's more for the rest of the African countries. We do not have that much migration to Europe. Most of our migration is to the Gulf, and it has its issues, but it's a huge source of remittances. But Europe, no, we do not have a problem with that, but we do hope and wish that the migration laws would change, because you have aging populations and you need our young people, and we need jobs and we need them to go, so we might as well sit and take care of the problem.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Massolo. So our guest is saying we should be more adventurous and
Yes.
braver, both in investment and in immigration policy and all that. But we have adventurous initiatives like the Global Gateway, and we have others, like we have the Mattei Plan, Italy, and there are other European plans. There are all countries, almost all countries have their own plan. Is there an overlapping of plans? Is there like a waste of energy? Should there be more coordination, for example, between this Global Gateway and the Mattei Plan that is focused on Africa, launched by the Meloni government?
Thank you. First, let me very briefly say something to Director Abdellatif. It is not that much that Europe wants to protect against China. It's that we would like to be heard despite China. And we are not managing, in my humble opinion, we are not doing well from this point of view for the reasons that I was trying to explain earlier. As far as coordination, well, of course, there are many overlapping initiatives, and to a certain extent, I think that we are here in an inextricable problem. That is, to a certain extent, overlapping will always be there. Coordination can exist, but can exist de facto. Maybe an attempt of coordinating has been done by the Italian government in its capacity as chair of the G7 during the G7 summit of the leaders in Puglia, and the result here was to try to find a common ground between the national initiative, Piano Mattei, the European initiative, Global Gateway, and the G7 initiative, which is the program on infrastructures. Of course, this can't be done only top-down. It needs sort of a machinery up to a certain extent without being too ambitious, because it is something that you do de facto. It's not something that you can impose. Of course, we would benefit from a more relevant amount of coordination, but let's confront reality, let's be realistic. I think that there is something that is quite important here. And the important thing is to try, at least among Europeans, but I would dare to extend it also to the G7 framework, to share a common attitude. And from this point of view, the Mattei plan has something to say. Of course, it's not the solution, but it is something that can be a meaningful contribution, because it represents a change of mentality, no longer dealing with problems that affect, for instance, Africa, when they become problems for us, but to try to work them out together in a joint initiative of common work. That is, let's grow together. Win-win, mutually reinforcing. It's good for us, and it's good for the countries of destination of the Mattei plan. It's awfully difficult, but if we get to share on a wider basis this kind of approach, and if we integrate this with a little bit more of money, and I will come to that in a moment, and with a bolder, exactly like the director was saying, in a bolder way of of conceiving what we do, that is not exactly dogmatically attached to conditionality as if it has been written in the stone. But I mean, an evolutionary concept of conditionality, maybe something will get on the right track. Money. Well, money is important and money is scarce. It's scarce chiefly for governments and it's scarce for the European budget, we know. So what's the solution? I see only one solution, which is, of course, not a one-size-fits-all, but it's something that could help, which is joining efforts with the private sector, public and private. But it is not that you can do it like that. It is not that you can do it only by saying. It is up to governments to try to offer the companies, the private sector, meaningful occasions of cooperation. That is, private sector reacts when it feels that it can share an interest. And it's not in abstracto. It is not something that is, one has to take for granted or simply because governments make appeal to the private sector that the private sector necessarily responds. It's not a question of sympathy. It's a question of interest. So let's try to develop increasingly and more so, increasingly so, trying to look for fields where joint initiatives can be reciprocally profitable. This is a huge challenge, but I think that you can progress only in a pragmatic way. Otherwise, you are stuck to the existence situation, which is unsatisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Massolo. We almost ran out of time, but maybe there are questions or interventions or suggestions to make the Global Gateway work from the audience, or any question from our speakers, please. I just saw you. Well, speak up. Someone's coming with a microphone. Rescue's on the way.
Thank you. So I'll start again. So Karim El-Gandhi, Associate Fellow at Chatham House. I was wondering if any of the speakers could comment on the differentiation, the level of differentiation that the PGII's, the G7's initiative, as well as the Global Gateway, focus on energy transition, on climate and some of the environmental issues compared to the Belt and Road, which did not. So that it looked, when those two initiatives came out, much later, 10 years later, as you pointed out, than the BRI, that would meant to be a differentiating factor. That Europe would bring climate action, would bring energy transition to the markets that it's trying to reach out to, the countries that it's trying to reach out to. In your experience, have you seen that gain any traction? Did that benefit anyone? China seemed to respond immediately by greening the BRI, or initiating a process of greening the BRI. But clearly Europe had a significant advantage and a higher moral ground. Would you care to comment on how much that was successful in gaining traction?
Is that a question for anyone specific? Otherwise, I will pose it to Ambassador Massolo, maybe more involved.
No one in particular.
I'm the only one who doesn't know anything about this. So anyway, one of the three, you choose, or Ambassador.
Well, from my perspective, this was not sufficiently performed. That is, I may say that as far as energy transition is considered, we are falling in a more general framework of a slowdown. And, you know, when you tell Europeans slow down, they very willingly slow down. And so, unfortunately, and so this is what is happening. But maybe one of the countries of destination can be more explicit and meaningful than me.
Please be explicit. That's what
I've been explicit enough. You want more? Actually, I don't see the European side really working. I mean, again, it's more rhetoric than action, because if you go for the real action, then you would expect the EU to reduce its own its own carbon emissions, its own green transition. This has always been a problem for us. A continent like Africa is contributing no more than 3% to the international GDP, and which means no more than 3% to the climate problem. And yet they're carrying all the ugly part that's associated with it. And on top of this, they are facing those new non-tariff barriers, this CBAM, which is going to affect our exports seriously. So it's not, as long, when things move from the rhetoric to the action, then one can say that something is happening. I don't see it. As far as the intentions are concerned, they're always there.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more quick questions for, please, the gentleman there? Well, we have time for one, I am afraid, unless, yeah, not even one? Not even one. Well, a quick one, the gentleman there. I just gave him the microphone.
Okay. I'm a law student, first year. I would like to know, we talk about a stronger European Union, but how we can talk about a stronger European Union if we rely that much on the United States, I would say. For example, talking about the fight to the Chinese overcapacity, does it really benefit the European situation, or is more like the impact of the USA politics on the European? And if in the future we should like distance ourselves from the United States and what
banking and a common capital market policy in order to counteract most of the issues that we have at stake. We're still going on about the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to our guests, Mr. Dilatev, Mr. Caruana, and Ambassador Massolo, and this is it.